Hello everybody, my name is Julie. Welcome back to Pages and Pens. Today I am here to talk about aphantasia. Let's jump right into it. So I know that this is a little bit of a different video for me. This is a different topic for me, but today I wanted to discuss with you aphantasia. It is something that really took me by surprise and took Twitter by storm a little while ago, as everybody had these conversations and debates about mental imagery. For those of you that do not know, aphantasia affects maybe 2% of the population. I think they said about 98% of the population can form mental images in their head. For the other percentage of people, they are aphantasic. They have aphantasia, and that means that they cannot form mental images in their mind. You'll hear often readers saying that reading is like a movie in your mind, and that as you read, you're picturing all of these scenes in your mind. For people with aphantasia, that does not happen. So Twitter was having this debate of picturing an apple in your head, and how do you see the apple? Is it one-dimensional, two-dimensional? Can you rotate it around? Is it golden? Is it red? Is it green? Can you take a bite from it and see the juices dripping out, or the bite mark and your teeth marks in it? Can you set it on a table and walk around it? And people were discussing whether or not they could do these things. There was an article that I read that discussed John Green and a quote from The Fault in Our Stars where it said, "I fell in love with you like falling asleep, slowly and then all at once." The author of that article discussed their journey through realizing that they had aphantasia the same way. They knew something was different. I think they said that their wife was guiding them through like meditation and visualizing things in meditation, and they were like, oh, I just thought it was something that you had to practice at, that maybe it wasn't something that he was good at, but he could get better at it with practice, and he could learn how to visualize the way that she seemed to be able to naturally do. And then they read an article about aphantasia and realized, oh, that's not something I'm going to be able to do. I have aphantasia. So it was during this Twitter debate that I realized, oh my goodness, I have aphantasia. And I do not picture things in my head. There is no running movie in my mind at all. There is no visualization when I am reading of characters, setting, anything. And so I wanted to discuss aphantasia and my experience with it and how it influences me as a reader and as a writer, and just a little bit about how I feel like I benefit from it. I guess. I know a lot of people realized, oh my gosh, this is a thing I have. And it was one of those moments where I really did freak out a little bit. It was a thing that I didn't realize I couldn't do. I didn't realize it was a default. I didn't realize it was a defect or something that everybody else seemed to be able to naturally do that I couldn't do. And I thought that that meant there was something wrong. Even though I've lived my whole life that way, I suddenly felt very insecure about that. And it really did get me quite shaken up. And I had to come to realize with a little bit of time and a little bit of distance that it actually was a benefit to me in some ways. So I want to kind of just break down a little bit about that, because it's a topic that I don't think I ever would have come to realize without Twitter and without that discussion taking place, because it's a very strange thing to have a conversation with. Like, hey, do you picture things in your head? And like, how would that come up in normal conversation? It also brought up the idea of talking to yourself in your head and having a running dialogue in your head. And that's something that I thought was very normal and very natural, because I always have a running dialogue in my head and a running conversation, a mental checklist. I'm always talking to myself, did you do this? You still have to do this, don't forget that. But a lot of people don't do that either. So our brains and our minds are wonderful, complex, mysterious things, and we're learning more about them all the time, and this was a thing that I learned about myself recently, so let's break it down. Hello friends, Editing Julie here on a snow day, and I wanted to touch base because as I was editing my video, I realized I'd forgotten a couple of things, so I wanted to just clarify a little bit. If you go to YouTube and you search in aphantasia, you'll find a whole bunch of videos, and one of the videos that I did find was a man who was discussing that he has complete aphantasia, but not only is he unable to call up mental images, he's unable to associate memories with emotions. So he said something like a breakup or a bad experience with food. he's not going to remember that negatively. So the next time he encounters that food, he's probably a lot more likely to eat it because he doesn't necessarily remember the negative emotion associated with the taste or a sickness or etc. Not the case for me. Also, his was completely total. And I also wanted to stress that sometimes aphantasia can lead to face blindness where you don't recognize faces. That's not something that I have a problem with. Because I'm not fully at the 0 side of the spectrum of aphantasia, able to do all that. And I don't even know that necessarily you have to be at the 0 side of the spectrum to have the disassociation with smells and sounds and emotions connected with memory. I don't think that those are necessarily completely linked. That's just his personal experience. But I wanted to just stress that I'm still able to do all those things. I do still have, like I might remember something and I might remember the emotion, or I may remember the smells or the sounds more than I do the images. So it's not a complete inability to remember the past. It's more the visualization of the past. And I also wanted to stress that I am a lot more likely to be able to create even a bare picture in my head if I've had a lot of exposure to the photographs or the media, like the image of it. For something like my favorite movie, like The Labyrinth, I'm probably a lot more likely to be able to recall Jareth's face or different scenes from the movie than I am something that I haven't seen before. The kids that I nanny for the other day were trying to explain to me what somebody's cake looked like on the kids baking championship, and I couldn't picture it because I had never seen it before. If I've seen something before, I'm a lot more likely to be able to recall even a basic image and outline in my mind, or be able to say, okay, I can see how that would come together. If I've never seen it before, I cannot construct the image in my head. I've seen apples before, but again, because you're asking me to create one and not recall a specific one, I'm not able to do it, but I am still able to call back up images if they're tied to heavy emotion or to really important memories, more than I am able to create a new image in my mind, which I think is what comes into play with reading and with writing. They're new images. It's not something I've seen before, so I'm not able to call it up in my head, which is why fan art sometimes can be really, really helpful, because I'm then able to look at the image and say, all right, this is what this person I'm reading looks like, and I'm able to have a base reference. I'm still not going to be able to call them up in detail, but I'm at least able to have a base reference. Just want to clarify that as I go in and edit this, so that there's, you know, as much clarity as I can just about my personal experience. And we can go back to the other Julie now. Aphantasia as a reader. I have heard a lot of my friends say that when they are reading a book, they are seeing a movie in their head. They're seeing all the images. Everything comes to life. So they read the words are translated into these images, and as they read, they are in the middle of this world that has been made up. And that is a very immersive experience. It's why they really lose themselves in reading, why people can sneak up on them when they're reading, because they are fully in a different world, seeing other things, experiencing other things. There's people that can smell other smells, you know, while they're being described in books. That's not me. So I have a much different reading experience than people that can do that. But I will say, I don't necessarily think that that's a hindrance. I do believe that that's probably one of the reasons why I can listen to music with lyrics while I write and while I read, because I don't have the extra visual stimulation going on. I can afford to have the music on and still be fine. I think it's probably why I lean more towards rich character development over rich plot and world building development, because I care about the heart of the story, the characters of the story, and whether or not it takes place in a white room and the setting is never described doesn't really impact my ability to enjoy the story, because I'm not picturing it anyway. So where a story takes place is usually pretty irrelevant. In fact, unless the setting becomes a focal point of the story in something like, say, The Wicked Deep, where you know it's a seaside town, you know there's like a lighthouse on an island. There's certain books where the setting does become a character. Otherwise, I could not tell you if a book takes place in a specific season, unless the cover is very indicative of that. If you asked me to describe, say, Furyborn, Kingsbane, Lightsong, if you asked me to describe the world that that takes place in, I can't tell you anything about the setting. I can't tell you anything about the world. There's just, I don't know. It could take place anywhere. I can tell you about the characters, and I can tell you about the general storyline, but in terms of where it takes place or what characters look like, I've got nothing. Fan art becomes very important for me, so non-spoilery fan art is like a blessing, because then I can at least see what the characters should look like, because when I'm reading them, I'm really not picturing them. I think it's one of the reasons why, character-driven stories are really important to me, and why lyrical writing is really important to me, because I may not be able to tell you what something looks like, but I can tell you what it should look like with words, if that makes any sense. If you were to ask me about one of my favorite covers, right? If you were to ask me about one of my favorite characters, I couldn't tell you what the characters look like. I just couldn't. But if you were to ask me to describe something, okay, so give me a second. Let me think of something. If you were to ask me to describe a snow-capped mountain, right? I would be able to tell you it was large, it was grayish black where the snow met the mountain, that the green pine trees were tipped with snow. I could tell you that there was probably like little footprints in the snow underneath the boughs of the fern or the evergreen trees. I could tell you that there was probably boulders jutting out from in between banks of snow, etc. But I can't picture it, but I can describe it in words. So when an author gives me that really lyrical, descriptive writing, I am able to remember a little bit better the setting and the characters because they went into detail. So I lean more towards a Laini Taylor type of writing, where it's incredibly, like, the purpley prose don't bother me because it helps me build a picture. The author needs to paint a picture with their words, distinct and also like eloquent enough that they stick in my head, that it becomes a part of the story, because otherwise it's gone. It has really influenced what I do and don't like in books, and what resonates with me and what doesn't in books. That's one of the ways that it influences me as a reader. Let's dive into the world of being a writer. For a lot of people, they're like, how do you write characters? How do you write if you can't picture it in your head? A lot of writers I've heard say they see their story as a movie in their head and then they just write down what they see. I can't do that. That doesn't work for me. I have had some feedback on my stories from beta readers and critique partners that they want the descriptions of characters earlier in the book so that they can start to picture them in their head and then carry that through the rest of the story. Because if I wait for the descriptions of a character, then by the time I've introduced that, they've already built a picture in their head, and when it doesn't match up, it's off-putting for them. But I don't picture my characters in my head, so putting physical descriptions for them is difficult. But then I realize, as a writer, I might be writing for somebody with aphantasia, and I need to be able to put those descriptors in so that they can start to build a picture of these characters. I tend to have a lot more white room syndrome and a lot more ambiguous settings. Come to a couple of different workarounds for that personally. One being photo inspiration. So for every chapter that I write, I have a photo of a setting, I have a photo of the characters, and I can pull from those pictures and use them as inspiration to sprinkle into my chapters so that I have physical indicators of where my characters are, what they look like, what they're doing. You'll see me probably describe my characters' outfits a lot more than I need to, because it's one of the ways I can identify a passage of time or really make my characters stand out, because otherwise there's nothing there for me for them. Photo inspiration really does help me kind of add in those physical details. And I don't think that that's something that everybody does, but I do try to give everybody a characteristic trait or a quirk or an action that they do, maybe a fidget, something that does identify them and make them stand out a little bit. because it also helps me kind of ground them in a space. But I don't think that there's an issue with creativity. I don't have a problem with my imagination. I have ideas. I have these visions in my mind, but they're words. If I were to describe somebody's pet, right? So if somebody has a dog, I'm going to describe the texture of their fur, the smell of them when they're fresh out of a bath, and the color of their fur, the length of the fur, the height of the dog. I don't see that dog in my head. I probably have a photo inspiration of it somewhere, but I'm not going to necessarily see that animal. And that's how I work. So I have to paint that picture with words. And I do think that that makes me a stronger writer in some sense. I do think that makes me focus a little bit more on character growth and character development. And while it does provide me a little bit of extra work to make sure I'm not writing inside of a white room, it's not a hindrance. It doesn't make anything impossible to do. Was kind of surprised and a little bit excited to see myself go back and look at my first self-published works, which was Shoot Down the Wendy Bird, which was a collection of flash fiction. And none of the photos for the inspiration were actually included in that book, but every single one of those stories had a photo inspiration. It's one of the reasons why I love doing photo prompts for my writing prompts on my website. If you are interested in checking out my writing community, my newsletter, and bi-weekly writing prompts, you can check them out at my website listed down below. I realized that photo inspiration works for me for flash fiction, especially because I can then see it. And then once I see it, I can write that, no problem. But it's not something that I can see on my own. So having that photo up, I can write that scene, no problem. I wouldn't probably have been able to do it otherwise. It's one of the things I love most about flash fiction is that I can legitimately write the second that picture takes place. I don't need to worry about what happened before or what happened after. I can just write that photo, that picture, whatever it might be, the drawing, the sketch, etc. And that's all I need to focus on. And that's very easy for me to do. The long form novels take a lot more effort for me, but I do think that it strengthens a lot of my other writing, and I just need to know where I need to fill in with specific things that I know I have a harder time with. It's an interesting way to look at the world, to read and to write. And in my reading and in my research, I actually realized, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that this author is a little bit problematic, but Mark Lawrence, who wrote the Grey Sisters series, I haven't read any of his work, but he actually has Aphantasia as well, and he writes these high fantasy worlds and has a very successful writing career. There are a lot of famous fantasy authors, authors in general, artists, photographers who have Aphantasia. And a lot of photographers really focus in on their photography as a way to see the world, view the world, and create these lasting images because they don't retain them in their minds. Now, I also want to stress that aphantasia is a spectrum. So from like a 1 to 10, 1 being I see no image, to 10 being I see it clearly, I can rotate it around, take a bite, leave, you know, etc. There is a sliding scale in there somewhere. So I don't want to sit here and claim that I have nothing inside. I'm probably sitting at a 2, maybe a 3. I also have found that the more I try to focus on an image, the quicker it recedes. So I might have an image in my head, and the second I go, oh, I'm seeing something, and I try to focus on it, it's gone. So I can have dreams. If I know a lot of people ask, like, do I see images when I dream? I do have dreams, but then I don't remember them. I can't recall them. I might be able to explain to you what the dream was about, but I'm not recalling the images in my head. I can see in some kind of detail things that are really, really, really ingrained. Things that have been with me since childhood, things that have been really influential to me. I can see a little bit. I'm not at a full 0, but I'm also not at the full 10. And there's never ever that running image or that running movie in my head when I'm writing or when I'm reading. If anything, the images that I keep in my head are the photo inspiration that I've taken to write my story. That might be what I see, but I can't create my own images. I might just be remembering things that I have stored on like a pin board or in my inspiration folders for my stories, my characters, my settings. It's an interesting phenomenon, and it's not one that I have a lot of experience with. I'm still learning every day what it means for me in terms of my reading and my writing, but I just wanted to come on here and kind of discuss it a little bit because I've talked about it a little bit in my live streams, but I haven't actually sat down to discuss it with you and how it influences my reading and my writing. But I've noticed that it definitely does impact both of those things. Again, I'm still learning exactly how, and I'm still learning how to strengthen the parts of my writing that are a little bit more challenging because of the aphantasia. But it was an interesting discovery. It was a very powerful thing for me to learn from Twitter, and I definitely spiraled for a little bit, and I was like, how am I functioning? How can I be a writer? How can I be a reader if I'm missing this thing that everybody else has and I don't have it? And I freaked out. And then I was like, this is ridiculous. You've been a reader and you've been a writer your whole life, and you've had aphantasia the whole time. So it's not stopping you. Clearly it's not an issue, but it is something that I'm a little bit more aware of now, and I'm trying to learn how to use it as a strength, and I'm trying to find ways to subvert it in my writing and, you know, in my life to strengthen my craft. And it shows me different parts that I need to focus on that I maybe didn't realize was a weakness. I used to think I was just really, really bad at setting. And I was just really, really bad at descriptions. And then I realized it's a little bit less that and a little bit more I don't see it. And I've been able to really lean into using my words to describe those things. I'm not picturing an image in my head. I'm picturing a checklist of descriptors, right? So when you say picture a dog, I'm not picturing a dog. I'm picturing a checklist of descriptors. And so when I go to write a dog, those descriptors are already there. I'm not leaning on an image that I am not translating well to the reader. I already have the descriptors, and then I can translate them. So I think it's an interesting part of me. I'm excited to kind of dive more into the world of it without trying to freak myself out too much. I think it's really interesting. I think it's a really cool adaptation that I've taken that makes me a stronger writer and makes me maybe a more selective reader. That's a little bit about me and aphantasia as a reader and as a writer. If you have aphantasia, I'd love to know down below what your thoughts are. If you don't, is this something that you've heard about before? It's an interesting topic to discuss. I'm open for discussion in the comments always, so feel free to leave me one down below. If you have stayed until this part of the video, maybe leave me like the photograph or a camera, some kind of image in a description as an emoji down below or a comment. Be sure to like this video, give me a big thumbs up, click subscribe, and click the notification bell so you know when I put out new videos. And I will see all of you in the next one. Bye, friends.